Welcome back. You're watching The Globe on SABC News. Now, hundreds of thousands of people opposed to Britain's withdrawal from the European Union marched through central London on Saturday, demanding a new referendum as the deepening Brexit crisis risked sinking Prime Minister Theresa May's premiership. Marchers set off in central London with banners proclaiming "We demand a people's vote" in what organisers said could be the biggest anti-Brexit protest yet.
While there was no official estimate of the numbers, campaign organisers said hundreds of thousands of people were in the crowd as it began to march. After 3 years of torturous debate, it is still uncertain how, when or even if Brexit will happen, as Prime Minister May tries to plot a way out of the gravest political crisis in at least a generation. In the June 23, 2016 referendum, 17.4 million voters, or 52%, backed Brexit, while 16.1% or 48% backed staying in the bloc.
Well, I just think that we didn't make an informed decision. We weren't on both sides. We weren't given enough information. We weren't told what Brexit would actually look like because they didn't know what Brexit would actually look like. And I think now we actually know what Brexit might be. We should be able to make an informed decision. A proper vote rather than based on like weird ideologies and sort of vague ideas about what Brexit might be.
Why is it important? Because the country is in a mess. Brought on by our government, their incompetence. The vote should have never happened in the first place back in 2016. It was a ridiculous proposal to put before the British people, and we've been regretting it ever since. So that's why everybody's here today, because there is huge feeling in the country that it was all wrong. And we need to put a stop to it.
It's really important that we just stay in. You know, we're stronger together, aren't we? Who are we going to trade with? Yeah, nobody. Liechtenstein. Yeah, that's it. So, yeah, so really important that we at least get this chance for another vote. And then if it gets through again, then, well, we've tried our hardest, but at least we've done our bit. Yeah.
I want to stop Brexit because I believe we're stronger together, so we don't need to put up artificial barriers between us and other people wherever possible. And we especially shouldn't do so when we've essentially been sold down the river by a small group of elites to do so. So break down barriers and work with other people, I think.
But it's polarised people so much in this country, and I'm just absolutely gobsmacked and blown away by the total arrogance and incompetence of the Prime Minister and the government, who just seem to be in a state of paralysis.
Some opinion polls have shown a slight shift in favour of remaining in the European Union, but there has yet to be a decisive change in attitudes. And worn down by 3 years of indecision in London, European Union leaders on Thursday reluctantly offered the UK more time to ease itself out of the bloc, delaying by several weeks but not eliminating the threat of a chaotic British exit. After a meeting that stretched through the afternoon and over dinner, the bloc said Britain could postpone its March 29 departure to May 22nd if the UK Parliament approves Prime Minister Theresa May's divorce deal with the bloc next week. If the twice rejected deal is thrown out again, the bloc says Britain has until April 12 to indicate a way forward.
For more on this story, we are joined in studio by Patrick Bond, a Professor of Political Economy at the University of the Witwatersrand Wits School of Governance. Prof, always a pleasure having you in studio with us. Now, this is we're just chatting off air, the fact that where it all went wrong. Where did it go wrong for the United Kingdom?
Well, I think there's the short term where Theresa May just hasn't been strong enough in her party. She's lost these 2 huge votes trying to get her deal through. Her leadership has been sorely lacking. And then there's a longer term problem, which is the general forces in Europe that's just tearing apart the countries, especially the peripheries, and that includes the working class in Britain. But you saw Ireland a few years ago, Greece still in a depression, Italy is turned more or less anti-European. There's so many pressures on these countries to cut their budgets and to respect the power of the German bankers at the heart of the euro, that it's sort of taken a centrifugal force and things are spinning out of control. And the working class is very resentful, hence they voted 52-48%, normally from the sort of deindustrialized parts of Britain, which is the sort of the northern parts of England especially. And that means what you saw today was very maybe predictable, because over 1 million people, they say, turned out. In London, the site where the most pro-Remain votes have been. And what they're wanting is a second referendum. And with the chaos in Parliament, they may feel that by pushing hard as they marched up to Parliament, they can show the society wants another chance to vote on Brexit.
Now, just watching the clip that played just before we started our discussion, a young lady saying that Brexit wasn't really explained to her or to them as to exactly what it would entail. Are we likely to see a second referendum taking place?
Well, that's a good question, because it partly depends on whether Theresa May just is completely unable on her third try, which could come this week, to get a version of her deal through. And if she fails again, she'll have a few other options, and that would be to call an election. She wouldn't win, and although she has her leadership secure formally, there are big moves by her backbenchers to replace her. And the person who might step in, probably the front runner now, is even harder on Brexit. That is Boris Johnson. Her other choice is to have the second referendum. A third, now that the Europeans yesterday put the deadline back 2 weeks, is just to have the hard Brexit. So there are 4 scenarios, really, if she's unable to get the deal. Probably the most likely was, it depends on her leadership, but she would say, okay, let's have that second referendum. Don't forget, she had originally voted to remain. She was part of the group that wanted to remain. And I think that sense that she had to follow the democratic mandate, and that her party had a very, very strong Brexit component. But again, both parties are profoundly split. The leader of Labour may well be secretly Lexit, that is, leaving the European Union from the left. That's a sort of a position where, if he were to become Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn would probably feel he'd have more power to do the kinds of progressive changes he'd want if it wasn't for Europe looking over his shoulder and controlling the regulations and finances. And these are the sort of amazing quandaries that have split both parties.
A 2-week sort of hold until Brexit is supposed to be the 29th. They've given her an extension. Do you think it's even a possibility for the EU to maybe change their stance at a later stage?
Well, they seem very clear that they've been negotiating this now for a couple of years. It was June 2016. There should have been plenty of time to work out the modalities. The hardest one they still haven't dealt with, which is Northern Ireland and Ireland. That border is not as satisfactory as the so-called backstop, because so much of Northern Ireland remains in the UK, and yet it would be part of the European customs. So what they may do is something more creative. If she does have a new deal, it might be something like what Norway has, being part of the common market, but withstanding some of the regulations. I think the main thing, though, is whether she's got any sense of political durability. It looks like her party wants to get rid of her, and that would just put them into chaos. If they do, that risks a call for a new election. And if her very, very small parliamentary majority, which is because of an alliance with the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland, falls apart, which it seems it's on the edge of, it could be more turmoil just in Parliament, not even thinking about the rest of the Brexit situation. And the only other scenario that looks interesting is that they get another delay, but it's going to take them into the European election, and that would be on May 22nd, and then the British would have to actually stand for European seats. And of course, if they go Brexit, that makes no sense at all.
Now, what does it mean for the party going forward? And what are the people on the ground, the Brits, who are basically saying, we're confused, we don't know what's happening, that's why we're taking a stance and we're marching? You know, on the one hand, there's people who want to the hardline decision, and there's people who are just confused and don't understand what's happening.
Well, and you can't blame them. They definitely were lied to by the pro-Brexit right-wing politicians, Nigel Farage and his UKIP party, the UK Independence Party. They made all sorts of promises that the national health insurance would have more money. They had no anticipation of a £39 billion quid or euro fine that they'd have to pay for breaking all these agreements. So it's a very costly enterprise. Plus that the City of London and many of the trade agreements fall apart. If on April 12 they haven't done a deal, it's just a hard Brexit. That'll be very costly. And I think that's the main incentive, you know, for the Europeans to give them a little bit more slack, because that kind of an economic, a real crisis might unfold, and that would then flow into Europe. I mean, we have a very fragile world economy with a recession, maybe global recession looming, and to have this one political decision actually push it over the edge would be something the Europeans could say, well, we could possibly give you some more time.
Now, Prof, let's speak about the issue of immigrants coming into Britain and working there. For instance, the season of fruit pickers or vegetable pickers, where Romanians and Bulgarians and other countries are able to access the United Kingdom. What happens now when a situation where there won't be easy access going forward, if it does go through? No easy access, and these are looking at jobs that the Britons themselves feel they cannot do.
No, they don't want to. I mean, I think the crucial thing, there are 3 million of European residents in the UK who are permanent, and 2 million Brits who live in mainland Europe. That is a very big chunk of society to try to rearrange and reorganize. So I suspect one of the parts of the deal will be some guarantees that they'll be able to maintain. But for the seasonal workers, yeah, I think once they actually start the borders, it wouldn't happen automatically. What I've been hearing was that you could still, with a British passport, go to Europe with a visa that costs €7, nothing much, and then vice versa. So I think that's the sort of process that'll be carried through. But I think you're right to ask the question. A lot of lives are going to be absolutely disrupted by this process, and there's a lot of xenophobia in the British working class, a lot of racism, a lot of hatred of lower income workers who will come, Romanians, Poles, and they'll take jobs that many Brits won't want, but it does mean that the working class in Britain who feels dislocated by deindustrialization, that's their motivation often for turning xenophobic. You know, just as we have here, just as they have in the US and many other places. It's one of those scourges of globalization that is so disruptive, and it may get worse with the fourth industrial revolution. And with the job losses that have already been announced by companies like Honda, where they're saying there's going to be about 3,000 jobs that are going to be lost. You know, the impact of Brexit going forward for the British people, what does it say? And in terms of how does if Theresa May loses her position as Prime Minister, the new person who comes into that role, what can they do differently? How can they approach this differently to ensure that, you know, both parties win? Well, Lulu, it's exactly correct that the job losses they're incalculable. Some jobs would be saved because new tariffs would come in to protect British industry. So, for example, our automobiles from South Africa would suddenly get hit with a 10% tariff. It would make it more expensive to buy a South African-made car in Britain than it is today. That would save some of the jobs in the British industry. It would hurt us, of course. But you're right to say then, would you get a Prime Minister with an ideology that's a little bit more, let's say, free market, or they have a little phrase that they use there, it's quite ghastly, Empire 2.0, and then we'd see maybe a Boris Johnson, who was the foreign minister, if he did take over from May, going out to come to South Africa, going all over the Commonwealth, trying to do these free trade deals. You know, they had actually 40 deals that they had on their target list that they should cut in the period between the announcement of Brexit and present day, and they only did 7 of them, and they were the easiest, smallest ones. I mean, 1 or 2 that are more important, like Switzerland, but mostly very small countries. I think that's their dilemma, is that business is now realizing, wow, this will really change our pricing structure. Our supply lines will really be in quite a mess, and maybe there will be a few cities. Dublin might benefit by taking some of the action from the city. Let's see what the ideology emerges, because it's 2 parties with 2 different ideologies within each, pro-Brexit, pro-Remain, and they're all up in the air at the moment. Prof, unfortunately we have run out of time. Thank you so much for coming through. Now that's Patrick Bond, Professor of Political Economy at the University of the Witwatersrand, Wits School of Governance, joining us in studio. We'll be back after a short break.